Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are out there on the World Wide Web. This is Jeremy Geelan for SYS-CON TV. We're here with a Cloud Power panel. We have the great and the good, as usual, assembled on my left. And let's let them introduce themselves, I think. Save me a bit of time. Starting with you, Terry.
Yeah, thank you. Terry Woloszyn. I'm the founder and CTO of PerspecSys, and we enable cloud adoption in light of cloud data privacy, residency, and security concerns.
Not a small challenge. Pete is next.
Hi, I'm Pete Malcolm. I'm CEO of Abiquo. We provide enterprise cloud management, and we take physical infrastructure, pool it together, and create virtual enterprises which are self-service consumers of that, and we tie it all together with business policy.
He makes it seem so simple. And Andy.
My name is Andy Burton. I'm the Chief Executive of Rise, which is a US and UK based infrastructure as a service provider, and our unique proposition is that we're entirely through channels. So our purpose in life is enabling the IT channel that have traditionally sold on premise to be able to sell and provision and manage cloud services.
Right, so we've got three, as usual, experts and at the top of their companies. So we obviously have to start with the very simple question. 2011, I don't know who wants to go first on this. Is it the best year so far for your companies? Quick.
Certainly the best year
Mr.
so far for
Abiquo,
us.
yeah.
Yes. Certainly the best year so far for us because cloud has really started to be adopted. We in 2010 we found a lot of the enterprises really didn't know what it was they were going to buy, and therefore they hadn't really got budgets for what for that year. 2011, that's changed. They do now have budget. They are starting to move forward, and the sort of beginning of the avalanche is starting.
Are you seeing that, Andy?
Definitely. I think what we have seen is people are moving beyond the confusion around the language of cloud to actually trialing a service in the cloud, and we've seen great satisfaction with that trial. So we're seeing actual mainstream adoption and more companies actually looking at the cloud as part of their IT strategy. So definitely the maturity of the market is coming.
So Terry, you agree we've moved from cloud confusion to cloud clarity?
And poltergeist too. And absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing is from a public cloud adoption perspective, the enterprise is now finally taking reins where line of business or groups or departments were able to get into the public cloud application space without IT knowing it. Now IT is taking a step up and saying, okay, let's start looking at our usage of cloud. Let's start expanding that usage. But in light of that expansion also comes all of the compliance requirements, security requirements, and the like. So this has been a great year for us as that enterprise expansion of their cloud adoption is occurring. And IT is getting involved, and the CXOs are getting involved, saying, let's make sure that we're doing this correctly now rather than ad hoc, department by department. Great news for us.
Just as growthful at the SMB level, Andy, or is this only at the enterprise level?
No, I would say actually that the SMB is probably a greater adopter at this moment in time. By nature, on any bell curve, it is the vast majority of organisations.
Because the returns are quicker?
I would say that the primary reason they adopt in the first phase is actually not about returns, it's about flexibility and agility. So they're actually accessing technology quicker than they would have been able to in a traditional model. And what they're seeing with that initial adoption is the benefits that provide that return are there, and that's what's driving the subsequent adoption.
So time to value isn't just a phrase, it is actually real.
Yeah. But it's the flexibility, I think, that's attracting people in the first instance. People are moving to cloud to try it just because the fact they don't have the resources in-house in the smaller organisations. And some technologies, if you look at things like unified communications, they're just best served as a service. So we're seeing a lot of adoption in those kinds of areas.
Same kind of story, Pete?
Yes, I think so. I think the power of self-service, people are really understanding the benefits of that.
I like that. Power of self-service, that's a lovely phrase.
But self-service, it's easy to say, it's harder to deliver. Because it means actually, doing everything that you could do with a physical data center. So it's not just about provisioning servers, it's about storage, it's about networking, it's the entire story. And I think that that's something we've really only started to get to grips with relatively recently, and there's still some way to go in providing that complete service. It means you don't have to call an IT guy to do anything. If you do, it's not self-service.
Right. Terry, 2011? Best year so far?
Like I said, I believe so.
Company got funded. Somebody must.
That was great for us. I think there's Intel Capital investing in us in our Series A was recognition that cloud security as a segment is growing. It's security of the data has always been the top of the surveys, and we're seeing that concern now translate itself into solution offerings such as ours and recognition of those solutions being viable for enterprise consumption. So yeah, it's been a great year for us so far.
Andy, you've flown in for this panel from the UK, so an obvious thought is, any difference between Europe's take on cloud and what you think the North American approach is?
I wouldn't necessarily say the take is different. I think what we do see in the market at the moment in time is it is still in its divergent phase. So there's a lot of he who shouts loudest being heard in the marketplace at the moment in time. So it's not necessarily that we're seeing different standards in the UK to the US, different use of language. I would say that we are seeing probably a greater maturity of adoption. I have a business in the US, a business in the UK, and the UK business is at a greater point of maturity than the US one, just anecdotally.
Right, interesting. That might change. Pete, I mean, here you are. I know it's a US company, but I mean, you're from the UK.
I'm from the UK.
But you've had to come to here, so you think the US is ahead?
Well, not necessarily. We just think that the US is probably the home of technology like this. It's where we would probably be able to get the best investment in our company. It's ultimately where we might get the best exit when that time comes in the distant future. We just think it's we don't really see any particular difference between geographic. This is about where we think our company should be placed in terms of the customer base and the demand. We see it from absolutely everywhere. There's really no pattern that we can discern either from geographically or particularly in any industries. It really is very diverse right now.
Now that does beg the next question, which is, if this is going global, which it clearly is, let's just to put to one side the security issue. What about standards? Since when did standards ever translate globally fast? I mean, we've got a problem, surely.
Well, I think the phrase standards and fast don't naturally go together, do they? So I think you ought to put that into perspective. But what I would say is that the industry can pull together. I think in the absence of standards and regulation, that's where the industry and the leaders in the industry have got an opportunity to pull together. And I think the biggest objective we should have at this stage is not to be arguing definitively over different ways of phrasing the different technologies out there. It should be more about helping end users get transparency of what is possible to be provided to them. I think there's a lot of hype out there still. There's a lot of marketing activity going on, and what we're not necessarily seeing is clarity for the end user in understanding, when I take a service from a cloud service provider, who's really behind that service provider, where is the data actually being stored, where's it being processed, how well funded is it, can it deliver me the service levels that I'm looking for as a business. So when we do business in the physical world, relationships are much easier to understand. I think in the online world, there's a definitive absence of that integrity check that you get when you build trust in a relationship.
Now, I know in the UK you've been helping with that exact process. You have an organisation that...
Yes, there's a not-for-profit organisation. It's called the Cloud Industry Forum. I mean, it's not limited to the UK. It just happens to have been born out of the UK, but it's made up of international firms. But we launched a code of practice for cloud service providers to actually self-certify to be able to give customers information under three levels, which we call transparency, which is who's the real organisation, who's behind it, how well funded is it, etc., where it's data centres, that kind of thing. Capability, what kind of service levels can they offer, what happens if something goes wrong, when they enter contract, how will they help with migration of data, or will they not, and accountability, the responsibility of the executive team to be accountable for what they declare on their websites and be prepared to be accountable in the local legislation where that customer is based, not necessarily where their operations are based, because all of those things breed confidence and trust, which is the necessary ingredient for people to move their business into the cloud.
And is that something, Andy, that we could expect viewers watching this to see go global?
Definitely.
That notion of an industry forum and of a somewhat a throat to choke, I guess.
Yes, I think the fact that it's a not-for-profit, the fact that it's an independent body rather than a cartel, rather than a dominant industry player, so it's actually representing the whole industry, but it's doing it on a basis of not saying vendor A is better than vendor B, but requiring vendor A, B, C, D and E all present the same information to market so someone can make a rational and informed decision. So it's about helping make an informed choice rather than hiding behind the marketing hype that you often
Transparency, Pete, would that accelerate things from your end?
I think anything that helps to dissolve some of the hype is good. A lot of vendors have hidden behind products which are frankly not that great and have hyped them up. and that's coming home to roost a bit now. We've got some industry analysts out there actually comparing products for the first time, which is very good. And clearly, what Andy says about having codes of practice and that sort of thing is great. But I think we also need standards around how these clouds are going to actually operate from a technical level. And one thing I do think at the moment, which may be a bit controversial, is that this is being driven a lot by the public cloud side. And the public cloud side, whilst extremely important, is not in fact where the bulk of the users will ultimately be. And at the moment, it's driving it over the top of the enterprises. That situation won't continue. We're just at the tip of the iceberg of enterprise adoption here. They will be the real winners. They will be the real market. And right now, their needs are not being met by the majority of products in the marketplace.
So let's get this right. Let's back this up for people at home. Public, private, it's heard so much about. What you're contending is that for all the razzmatazz around public cloud, when it comes to an enterprise, in the end, you're going to need to be private.
Enterprises will need to start from being private, and they will ultimately move out into public cloud when public cloud meets their needs, particularly in terms of security, compliance, governance, all those sorts of things.
He's singing your song, Terry.
Absolutely he is.
So
Absolutely he is.
You're saying that it is possible.
I think the only difference is, and there's two points I want to make, one on the self-regulation, and the other one in terms of the adoption that we're seeing anyway, is from, depending on, and maybe this is comparing the SMB to the enterprise, but the adoption curve that I'm seeing from an enterprise perspective is very jurisdiction specific, and is also very sector specific. Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of adoption in the financial services, public sector, telecommunications. We're starting to see a little bit in terms of manufacturing and retail, and much less so in the healthcare, even though when you flip it around, healthcare is where everyone wants the e-records to be here in America, for example, and yet they're very concerned about the privacy of that data. You think that would be a natural fit for the cloud, and yet it's on its head. But that's what we're seeing in the enterprise adoption. They're not starting necessarily the private. They're starting off in the public cloud side of things. So the Salesforces, the Workdays, the Teleos, the NetSuites. There's that enumeration of the top tier and secondary and tertiary players in the public cloud space that we're seeing. And the other thing that's interesting in that adoption curve is the jurisdictions also seem to have an adoption pattern where in Europe, they're starting off with the CRM SFA like Salesforce, and the next thing they then get into is HR. Whereas in AP, we're seeing, again, CRM SFA like Salesforce starting off, and then they go into ERP like Taleo or NetSuite or one of those. So that's what we're seeing in the adoption patterns from an enterprise perspective. And so this is where I think what you're espousing is starting off with private and getting into a hybrid private-public. We're seeing it coming from the other end of the spectrum. It's a public cloud adoption first, then migrating, pulling some of that back in to a hybrid.
Are yours on the application side of the house, whether I'm probably more talking about the infrastructure side of the house?
Absolutely, and that's what exactly what we were hinting at before, is that you walk up the stack of infrastructure, platform, and software as a service, and then divide that line into, or divide that stack into three where it's private, public, and in the middle there's this fuzzy hybrid somewhere. I think you could take those 9 sections and say this is what vendors and customers are adopting in one or more of those squares. And depending on where you start, you then explode out from one of those corners. But you invariably start at one of those corners, I agree.
I think coming back to the issue of strategy in IT, I think one of the key issues is that it's neither SaaS nor infrastructure as a service, it's both. Yeah. And some organisations will start from a specific application bent, and they will see the benefits of that and work out how to build their utility infrastructure behind that. Others will start from a perspective that a younger organisation, more agile, they want to build their data centre infrastructure first online and then build out the application capability. But you're always going to want interoperability between the two. I fully believe that the issues around cloud, though, are less about technology. I mean, you mentioned the points about interoperability and security, and there are people like Object Management Group with interoperability standards being formed. There are people like the Cloud Security Alliance and their CAIQ process that they're working towards from getting people to at least understand what the issues and opportunities and challenges are around cloud security, because I would advocate they're not materially different to what they are on-premise. They just require the same kind of intelligence and perspective in terms of how they're managed and provisioned in the first place. So you've got these issues where there are technology barriers that have to be educated and overcome, interoperability and security being the two, but the big issue to me is trust. And I come back to this point again, where it doesn't matter whether you're a small organisation or a large organisation, you feel comfortable when you have control, and there is a sentiment still widely in the marketplace that cloud is somehow a loss of control, and that's where education can again come in and help people that they can make steps and they can move to a private cloud environment where they still control everything they require to control to achieve the benefits of cloud.
When you hear that, Pete, your eyes must light up. Control. This is something you can help with.
Absolutely, but I think that you need to consider the needs of these organisations. I mean, again, moving back to enterprises, we use these terms public and private cloud, which are actually not really helpful. This is really about a different management model for IT. It's the IT infrastructure guys focus on maintaining the hardware and delivering that to the right service levels, and we empower the applications people to do their own thing, to provision their own storage, networking, and compute, as we talked about. And that also has a few extra little twists, though, when you start to think about the public-private cloud debate. And there's been a lot of talk lately about, we've had some scares on public cloud, and there are some issues arise when you don't have your control, or when that isn't your data center. And I think these are some of the issues that are starting to emerge now. For example, we had the issue with the loss of data from Sony, and it was determined that in fact hackers had used servers at Amazon to actually carry out this. Now that of itself, it's no slight on Amazon there. This is not their doing, but it does introduce an extra dimension. If I as an enterprise or anybody is going to put my compute, my IT out in the public cloud, who else is there? How do I know whether those hackers are sitting on the same physical machine that I am? If you don't have control of the data center and who else is in it, as you don't in the Amazon circumstance, and I'm not picking out Amazon particularly, it applies to any public cloud, there are issues which arise that you didn't have before. And it goes on from there. In the US we have this thing called the Patriot Act. The FBI presumably is inside Amazon trying to find out what those guys were doing. Their data is on the same devices as my data, potentially. What does that do to the whole picture?
You see stunned silence, because of course when you said earlier, and you said there's no difference in that data security issue really between on-premise and cloud. I'm not necessarily hearing that from Pete and from Terry.
So I'm trying to be generic to the point that the issue is not manageable. It is manageable. The issue is controllable. The technology's out there. If you look at it from a fundamental point of view, there's only two truly different areas of security that come into play commonly. One is the fact that obviously you're working across an untrusted network, the internet, so there is a point of security of that communication path that has to be taken into account. And obviously if you're working in certainly a public cloud environment, you've got that whole multi-tenancy issue that you need to be managing. But I would equally argue, and again, I don't think the phrases private and public cloud help, because you can create virtual infrastructure, put a firewall around it, VPN it, put all the necessary security around it, and run private, to all intents and purposes, infrastructure on shared infrastructure. You can that capability is there in this day and age to do. So the point I'm making is not that the processes would be exactly the same as it is necessarily on an in-house data center, but the capability and the knowledge and the tools are out there to provide that. And I would argue, whether you're looking at the Amazon issue, the Gmail issues, the Epsilon issues, that they are all issues that get attention because of this phrase we call cloud, whereas Sony isn't even arguably a cloud service in the first place. And I think it's this aggregation of the marketplace that raises the spectre in the market more than necessarily the nature of the technology.
So that's
or
a
how
very
well it was
positive
managed.
note for people following the industry, that bear in mind that cloud discount factor, maybe look at the actual case.
I would say you're less likely to run a security issue when you're hosted with a professional provider, because it's their industry and their reputation at the end of the day, and they're there 24/7 with all the resources in hand. I mean, yes, you've got this control issue when you are a private company, but you don't lose control by moving to the cloud, would be my argument.
But you don't still have quite the same level, no matter how professional your service provider is. And I think we all agree that Amazon, and the example I used, is a totally professional organisation. And what happened a few weeks ago, troublesome though it was in fact a blip in Amazon's record.
Right, in the great scheme of things.
The great scheme of things, it wasn't a big thing. But you still come back to the point that there are other people in there with you that would not necessarily be with you in your private data center if you actually got physical walls around the thing, and that must expose you to additional risk, and that must mean that you need more visibility into what's happening inside those public clouds, which you don't have at the moment. A public cloud is a black box. You submit your stuff to it and you hope that the required thing comes out the other side. What happens while you're in there is completely invisible, and this is a big barrier.
The only thing I guess I'm disagreeing with you on is, again, it comes back to this blurring, is when is public cloud a public cloud? Because is a public cloud still a public cloud if you can actually VLAN, VPN, firewall your resources within it so no one else has physical access to those resources?
I agree that the technology exists to do that, but as long as they remain a black box, you don't know whether it has been done right. I think that is my point.
And that's why control must always rest with the customer.
Right.
So I think on that point we're agreed. I think there is just some, again, language differences that come about that don't help the end user make the right conscious decision. It all gets going back to this issue of how do you provide transparency. If we take Amazon again and the issue we had recently with the outage at their data center, that was all again saying, oh, the cloud's not reliable. What I would say is what that really highlighted is the fact that no, the cloud and their deployment is actually reliable. The issue was that customers weren't necessarily aware when they were investing in the specific virtual server solution that they were going for, that they hadn't actually invested in the redundant
The cloud
solution.
doesn't eliminate risk from operational risk from
but
that
my point is that you can educate the marketplace and you can say to them, by the way, yeah, that's a perfectly fine service to use, it's very cost effective, but if you want failover, if you want that redundancy, if you want multi-territory capability, then you actually need to be on this service. And that's where the industry needs to do a better job, is make the end user aware of when they're buying something, this is the capability.
But at that point, you have to say, who's the end user? Because I'm sitting here from an enterprise perspective, listening to all of this going, hang on a second, if I have to set up all this virtual private network and all the controls and all the management and everything else, and what amounts to a physical piece of hardware just being hosted outside my firewall, what benefit am I getting? And at that point, is it even still a cloud? Or is it just me having a box in someone else's premise being managed?
I think it's just a box.
I've got to pull that back again, right? And then the other thing then is, as you said, from an enterprise perspective, my adoption of cloud versus an on-prem solution is really the decision I have to make from an application perspective. And if I'm looking at it from that perspective going, well, I already have all my experience and understanding of how to manage an outage in my on-prem solution, and now I have to basically reinvent or cleanly invent a redundancy strategy across two different cloud application vendors, which today is not really feasible or possible. I'm going back to on-prem. So now we have this challenge of enterprise adoption again, where, and even for SMB, that would be a challenge. I agree with you on the one hand where, okay, from an infrastructure, maybe a platform as a service where it's my own application that I can then segregate across two or more providers and worry about it. But when I start getting into the software as a service, everything you're describing falls apart. And the other point I was trying to get earlier was this whole notion of, you mentioned the self-certification. We look at the quote-unquote success of SAS 70 Type 2 audits, and you're realizing a lot of these guys are just making it up as they're going, presenting it to the customer, saying, look, I've got the audit, I'm good, I'm a really good vendor. But in fact, it's all fiction. So on the one hand, we have pundits saying, well, we need more regulatory control. I'm on the other side going, no, we definitely don't want internet regulation per se from governments, but at the same time, if there's going to be any trust, it can't be self-serving self-regulation either. Where's the answer come in to imbue that trust in cloud to a level that the enterprise would then say, okay, now I can adopt this, now I can trust this?
So Andy, I'm hearing, I'm not going to put words into Terry's mouth, but just, so complex, that suddenly the trade-off doesn't seem worth it anymore, let's revert. So is that a danger? That world that you're explaining within a firewall is maybe too complex for...
No, I don't believe it's too complex. I think there are issues if you are an enterprise and you're looking to move everything to the cloud, then you are trying to architect something that's fundamentally different to somebody trialing a specific service or moving certain infrastructure to the cloud. And certainly from an SMB point of view, the economics are fundamentally different as well in terms of the resources and the capability they have in-house. And certainly I was talking from an infrastructure point of view and more from an SMB point of view, because that's the industry that I'm representing around this table. So from that perspective, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I would say that from a pragmatic point of view, if you compare the SAS 70 statement that you made to what I'm talking about with a code of practice, that yes, it's self-certifying, but it's self-certifying with teeth in the sense that the evidence does get actually formally reviewed. It's not like just taken on lip service and that we'll accept that that's the case. So it is actually verified that information is correct, is actually held in electronic documentation. It's a bit like the PCI DSS compliance. It's that kind of methodology where it's actually got teeth and that can be publicly withdrawn. But at the end of the day, industry self-regulation works on the basis of providing confidence and clarity and trust to the end user community and accountability on the part of the vendors. You need that kind of yin-yang push and pull, so you need end user looking for that certification and capability, and you need people to hold organisations to account that claim they have it, because to claim they have it and to be proven that they don't have it, it gets withdrawn and it gets publicly withdrawn. And at the end of the day, when you're in a young stage of an industry like we are with this one at the moment in time, where there are more new entrants coming in week by week, it's far more important to have a barrier to people going out there making these bold statements that just quite frankly aren't true. So having that credibility in the market is important. Should it move to fully independent verified certification? Absolutely, that kind of thing happens in time. Should it be adopted by the ISO? Naturally, those kind of things should happen over time, but they do take time, and I think there is no harm and only good can come from taking the steps forward in providing self-certification, because it does cause organisations to stop and think about what they're saying, and it does put the executives of that organisation on point if they make any misdeclarations.
You just said something interesting too, though. Barrier to entry. Is that going to start stifling the innovation we're seeing in cloud right now?
No.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so, because as I say, it's not about, whereas certain standards say you have to be this level or you have to be this level, what we're requiring with the code of practice is that organisations state what it is they actually do. We're not saying one is right and one is wrong, we're just requiring that the information is provided in a common format, so that every organisation can be compared. There's no right or wrong. They can say they have data centres in the US, they can say they have data centres in Outer Mongolia. That doesn't matter.
It just must be true.
It just must be true, and it must be referenceable, and you're able to therefore make an informed decision. Because data sovereignty, if you look at the issues that when you talk to customers, data is the number one issue. It's data privacy, it's data security.
So I'm making my business on, exactly.
But therefore I'm agreeing with you. But you can't get to the issues by looking at somebody's website and understanding how are those issues of data security, privacy and sovereignty covered without some kind of transparency of information. Yeah. So hopefully that gives you a better clarity as to why it's absolutely
question
fit for purpose.
To end on, because we've talked about some of these data problems, but let's look at it from a reverse perspective. It's easy to think of things that in 2011 might put a bit of a damper on things or whatever. What's the flip side? What would be something that could happen, or perhaps has happened in 2011, that emboldens you individually, or your companies, or the industry as a whole? What's been the really good cloud news to finish with? Something this year, or that maybe is in prospect, that you just know is bubbling up. Come on, Pete, you always know about things that are bubbling up.
Well, I think the whole self-management thing is going to be the thing that provides the real benefit, and I think we're now getting to the nub of the argument about which bit's going to get adopted where. The truth is that both are going to get adopted, and from the SME side, their adoption will be more from the public cloud side, and from the enterprises it will be more from the private cloud side. But the enterprises will move over steadily to public as well, as they see their security requirements and a whole host of other things that they need, portability, those sorts of things. We don't have that between the two, particularly at the moment. Once those things are met, so I think there's these things will start to get ironed out, and adoption will start as soon as we've really got clarity, and I think we are getting clarity now about what the difference between these things is and what the needs of each are. It's not a question of public versus private. It's a question of which is suitable for what at the right time, and being able to determine which of your applications are suitable to go to the cloud, the public cloud, and which have to stay in your private cloud.
Do we say amen to that, gentlemen?
Absolutely, definitely. No disagreement.
We say amen. We have reached an extraordinary outbreak of consensus. We want to thank our three experts, Terry Woloszyn, CTO of PerspecSys, Pete Malcolm, CEO of Abiquo, and last but definitely not least, Andy Burton. Thanks so much, CEO of Rise, for joining us and giving us a UK and global perspective. Thank you for joining us here in Times Square. That's the end of this particular Cloud Expo Power Panel, but we'll catch you in November. Thank you again. There you are. Now, did you think that was 30 minutes?
No, nothing like